The forest at night is not empty. It hums with a quiet life of its own. The whisper of wind through branches, the call of an owl, the rustle of unseen animals moving through the brush. It is a silence that isn't silent at all, a silence that carries presence, a silence that feels like it is watching you as much as you are listening to it. On November 5th, 1975, in the cool air of an Arizona evening, 7 men finished their day's work in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. They were loggers, rough men, accustomed to long hours and heavy labor, their lives measured by the rhythm of saws and the weight of timber. Among them was Travis Walton, just 22 years old, wiry, determined, a man who belonged more to the woods than to the city. That day had been ordinary. Chainsaws had roared, axes had bitten into bark, sweat had gathered beneath shirts. The men, tired but satisfied, loaded into a beat-up pickup truck as twilight settled over the forest. The headlights cut narrow beams into the gathering dark, bouncing across dirt roads carved between towering pines. They laughed, they argued, they talked about their pay. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, until the glow appeared. At first it was faint, a strange shimmer between the trees. The men thought it might be a fire, a dangerous but familiar threat. The truck slowed, all eyes fixed on the light. But as they drew closer, their voices faltered. It was no fire, it was something else entirely. Hovering just above the ground, partially obscured by trees, was a disc-shaped craft, metallic, radiant, glowing with an amber light that made the forest shimmer as if it were alive. The truck rolled to a stop. The men sat frozen. Travis was the first to move. Curiosity lit his face. Against the shouted warnings of his friends, he pushed the door open and stepped onto the forest floor. His boots crunched against pine needles. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The others yelled for him to come back. He didn't listen. Step by step, he moved closer. The craft loomed above him, larger now, its light filling his vision. A soft humming pressed against his ears, subtle but steady. And then it happened. A beam of light exploded downward, striking Travis in the chest. His body arched violently, lifted into the air, and slammed to the ground with a force that made the men scream. Panic ripped through the group. Someone shouted to drive. The engine roared, the truck lurched forward, and 6 terrified men fled down the dirt road, leaving their friend in the clearing. Their voices were chaos, tangled with fear. "He's dead," one shouted. "It killed him," another cried. The truck sped recklessly, headlights bouncing across trees, hearts pounding against ribs. Only when the adrenaline softened into shock did they stop. The forest was dark. The truck idled. Silence returned. And then guilt crept in. They had left him, their friend, their brother in labor, their companion in the woods. They had abandoned him beneath that light. No one wanted to return. No one wanted to see what lay in that clearing. But conscience won. Slowly they turned the truck around. Slowly they drove back into the woods. The glow was gone. The craft was gone. And Travis Walton had vanished. The men searched with flashlights, their voices trembling as they called his name. The beams cut across trees, across brush, across empty ground. But Travis was not there. The clearing was bare, silent, as though nothing had happened at all. But they knew what they had seen. A craft, a beam, a body lifted, thrown, consumed by light. And now, Travis Walton was gone. When they returned to town, their voices cracked with desperation. They went to the police. They told them the truth, or at least the only truth they had, that a man had been taken by something they could not explain, that Travis Walton had been abducted in the Arizona forest. The ride back into town was heavier than the truck itself. 6 men sat in silence, the engine grinding against the dirt road, headlights cutting across trees that suddenly seemed taller, darker, less familiar. Every bump rattled their nerves, every shadow seemed alive. No one wanted to speak, but silence was unbearable, so words tumbled out, broken, frantic, unfinished. "We left him. We had no choice. He's dead." "No, you saw it took him." Each man clung to his own memory of the moment. Some swore Travis had been thrown to the ground. Others swore he had been lifted into the beam and pulled upward. The details blurred, but the fear was the same. Their friend was gone. By the time they reached Snowflake, Arizona, the story seemed impossible even to their own ears. How could they tell anyone what had happened? Who would believe them? Yet they had no choice. They went to the sheriff. Mike Rogers, the crew leader and Travis's closest friend, spoke first. His voice shook as he told the story. He said they had seen a glowing craft. He said Travis had stepped out. He said a beam of light had struck him, and then Travis was gone. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. His pen hovered over the notepad. He had known these men for years. He knew they were hardworking, rough around the edges, not the type to spin tales. But what he was hearing sounded less like a report and more like a nightmare. And yet, the men's faces were pale. Their hands trembled. Their voices cracked. The sheriff called for backup. Soon, deputies gathered, listening, scribbling notes, exchanging doubtful glances. The men were separated, questioned individually. Their stories matched. Details shifted here and there. Fear blurs memory, but the core remained unshaken. A craft, a beam, a man gone. The sheriff frowned. To him, there were only two possibilities. Either something extraordinary had happened in those woods, or something terrible had happened, and these men were covering it up. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let the weight of that moment settle, because what began as mystery soon twisted into suspicion. Word spread quickly through Snowflake. Travis Walton was missing. His family panicked. His mother, stoic but shaken, listened as officials asked questions she could not answer. Reporters began to circle, hungry for a story. But the story they wanted was not one of light in the sky. It was one of crime. Whispers filled the town. Maybe the men had fought. Maybe something had gone wrong in the forest. Maybe they had killed Travis and invented a wild tale to hide it. The sheriff considered it. The deputies considered it. The possibility grew louder than the silence of the forest itself. But the men held firm. They insisted they were telling the truth. Investigators organized a search. Dozens of men combed the woods with dogs, flashlights, radios. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the dense forest for signs of a body. They found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no blood, no Travis. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed him whole. The crew became suspects. Reporters painted them as liars. Their families endured shame, gossip, doubt. Each man carried the heavy shadow of accusation. And yet, none of them broke. Their voices never wavered from the same impossible story. A craft, a beam, a man gone. To prove themselves, they agreed to polygraph tests. One by one, the men sat under the glare of examiners, wires attached to their skin, questions repeated, answers steady. The results stunned investigators. All passed, except one test deemed inconclusive. The machines could not find lies, but still, suspicion lingered, because Travis Walton was still missing. The days stretched. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each sunrise brought more whispers, more doubt, more grief. His family clung to hope, but the town grew colder. The men, once ordinary loggers, became pariahs. Every look cast at them was heavy with accusation. And then came the fifth day. The phone rang in Travis Walton's brother-in-law's house. A trembling voice spoke. It was Travis, alive, confused, terrified. He had returned. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Let that shock wash over you. The impossible turning once more. For 5 days, the world believed him dead. For 5 days, the men carried the weight of suspicion. And now, against all reason, Travis Walton was back. But where had he been? What had happened in the forest? And what story would he tell? The phone call that broke the silence came late at night. After 5 long days of doubt, suspicion, and grief, the Walton family answered to a voice they had almost given up on hearing again. It was Travis. His words were faint, trembling, drenched in exhaustion. "I'm at a gas station," he whispered. "Come get me." Within minutes, his brother and brother-in-law were in a car, headlights cutting through the Arizona dark. Their minds raced. Could it be true? Could Travis really be alive? They pulled into the station, nerves trembling, eyes scanning the shadows. And there, huddled near a payphone, was Travis Walton. Thin, disoriented, pale as moonlight. His clothes were torn, his face hollow. His eyes darted nervously, like a man hunted. He could barely stand. His family rushed to him, holding him steady, their voices breaking with both joy and disbelief. Travis wept. He clung to them. His words came in fragments. They took me. The ride back was quiet, broken only by sobs and the occasional whispered reassurance. Travis sat slumped against the seat, body trembling, mind still tangled in something he could not yet explain. When he arrived home, the house filled with whispers, gasps, embraces. His mother held him, her strong arms barely masking the quake of her heart. His siblings hovered near, staring at the man they had begun to mourn. But joy was tempered by unease, because while Travis had returned, something within him had not. He flinched at sudden noises. He spoke in fragments, his sentences dissolving into silence. He seemed both present and distant, as if part of him was still lost in the forest. And slowly, piece by piece, his story began to unfold. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Imagine sitting in that quiet living room, the fire crackling, the family gathered, waiting for words that seemed impossible. Travis said he remembered approaching the craft. He remembered the light. He remembered pain. And then he awoke. Not in the forest, not on the ground, but inside. The ceiling was curved, metallic, glowing faintly with a dim amber light. The air felt heavy, pressing against his skin. His body ached, as though every nerve was on fire. He tried to move, but weakness held him down. His eyes fluttered, blurred, until shapes emerged. Figures, 3 of them, small, thin, with large, dark eyes that seemed too deep, too knowing. The classic image the world had only begun to whisper about in those years. The Greys. They stood over him, silent, watching, their expressions unreadable. Travis panicked. Adrenaline surged through his body. With trembling arms he shoved against them, scrambling from the table. He screamed, his voice ragged, echoing off curved walls. The beings did not react with anger. They did not strike. They simply watched, their large eyes unblinking, their thin hands reaching slowly, carefully, as if to calm him. But Travis wanted no calm. He wanted escape. He staggered through the room, searching for an exit. He saw strange instruments, panels that glowed faintly, a door that seemed to ripple like liquid when touched. Somehow, he found his way out, down a corridor, into another chamber, and there, the figures changed, no longer the small beings, but taller ones, human-like, their skin pale, their features symmetrical, their presence strangely comforting. They wore helmets, translucent, like glass. Their eyes, though more human, still carried a depth that unsettled him. One of them guided him gently, wordlessly. Their touch was firm but not cruel. Travis was led into a chamber where a single chair sat in the center, surrounded by panels of light. When he resisted, the being placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes meeting his, and Travis felt his strength dissolve, the fear drained, replaced by calm he could not explain. He sank into the chair, and then nothing. The next memory he had was of waking near the roadside, the night air cold against his skin, the glow of the gas station in the distance. The craft was gone. He was alone, and 5 days had passed. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Imagine his trembling voice, recounting this to his family, to investigators, to anyone who would listen. Imagine the weight of disbelief pressing against him, the same disbelief his coworkers had endured. The same ridicule the world always offered in place of wonder. But his eyes told another story. His voice, fragile yet steady, carried truth. Not polished, not perfect, but raw. And though some doubted, many believed, because Travis Walton had vanished. For 5 days, and now he had returned, carrying a story too strange to invent. The forest had taken him, the light had consumed him, and whatever happened in those 5 days, he would never be the same again. Travis Walton's return did not end the mystery. In many ways, it began it. When he staggered back into life after 5 days, thin and trembling, the town of Snowflake breathed both relief and suspicion. Families rejoiced, but whispers spread quickly. Where had he really been? What had really happened? The story of a glowing craft and beings with dark, unblinking eyes was too strange for some, too frightening for others, too tempting for skeptics to dismiss. The media descended. Reporters arrived with cameras, with notebooks, with hungry questions. They wanted details, drama, contradiction. They wanted either proof or fraud. Nothing in between. Travis, still weak, still shaken, found himself surrounded by flashing bulbs and microphones. His voice, barely steady, repeated fragments of what he had seen. The craft in the forest, the beam of light, the strange beings, the chamber of instruments, the human-like figures who had guided him, the sudden void, and then his reappearance near the roadside. The world listened, some with awe, some with disbelief. Skeptics sharpened their knives. They said he had staged it, that he had run into the woods and hidden, that it was an elaborate hoax planned by loggers who wanted fame or money or both. They pointed to gaps in his memory as proof of lies. They mocked the details of small beings and silent corridors. But others defended him, because 6 men had witnessed the beam of light. 6 men had passed polygraph tests, their trembling voices insisting on the same impossible truth. And Travis himself, pale, hollow, shaken, seemed less like a man inventing a story and more like a man still struggling to survive one. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, inhale, exhale. Let yourself feel the tension in that small Arizona town where belief and doubt collided like storm fronts. Investigators pushed harder. Travis was questioned repeatedly, his story examined from every angle. Scientists weighed in, psychologists speculated, UFO researchers gathered like moths to flame. Some called him a liar, others called him a pioneer. But through it all, Travis's story never bent. He described the forest, the craft, the light, the beings, always the same. His voice carried no flourish, no desire to impress, only fragments of memory, stitched together with fear and awe. The polygraphs returned again. More tests, more questions, and again, the results leaned toward truth. The loggers, once accused of murder, were slowly released from suspicion, but ridicule remained. Newspapers framed the story as curiosity. Late-night talk shows mocked it with laughter. Skeptics wrote it off as fantasy. Yet the story refused to fade, because the mystery was not only what Travis said, it was what could not be explained. 5 days missing, no food, no shelter, no trace in the wilderness. A young man returned, thin but alive, carrying a story too strange to be rehearsed. Doctors examined him. His weight was down. His body showed signs of dehydration. Yet there were no injuries that matched 5 days in the wild. No scratches, no bruises from survival in rough terrain. It was as if he had been preserved. And then there was his mind. He flinched at sudden lights. He spoke softly, haltingly, his eyes distant. He was not playing the role of a hoaxer basking in fame. He was the portrait of a man who had seen too much. Breathe again. Inhale, exhale. Imagine yourself sitting across from Travis Walton in those days, his hands clasped, trembling, his eyes far away, fixed on something only he could see. His voice steady but strained as he said, "I know what I saw. I wish I could forget it, but I can't." This is what haunted believers and skeptics alike. The story was too fragile to be fake, and too strange to be dismissed. As weeks passed, the frenzy slowed. Reporters moved on to new headlines. Skeptics filed their doubts. Believers kept their hope. And Travis, left behind in the quiet of Arizona, carried his story like a weight. But the silence of the forest had changed him forever. For when you are taken into mystery, you never return the same. And Travis Walton, whether believed or doubted, was now part of that mystery for life. Memory is not a straight line. It bends, it fractures, it hides some things in shadows, while casting others in a harsh, unforgettable glow. For Travis Walton, the days after his return were filled with fragments, flashbacks, glimpses that came not as whole stories, but as shards of light in a darkened room. He wanted to forget, yet the memories came anyway. The first was of awakening. He remembered pain, raw and electric, coursing through his body as though every nerve had been struck at once. His chest burned, his head pounded, and when his eyes opened, the world around him was not the forest floor, not the inside of the truck, not the familiar night sky. It was something else. The ceiling arched above him, curved and metallic, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against his skin like an unseen weight. He lay on a table, cold, hard, smooth. His mind reeled, his breath shallow, and then shapes, figures, small, thin. They moved toward him with deliberate calm. Their heads large, their eyes even larger, pools of black that seemed bottomless, reflecting his terror back at him. Travis screamed. He shoved against them with every ounce of strength his battered body still held. His arms flailed, his voice echoed. Panic drowned everything. The beings did not fight back. They did not rush. They only watched, tilting their heads, their thin hands reaching slowly, almost curiously. But panic gave Travis strength. He stumbled from the table, staggering toward the nearest corner, searching for escape. He saw strange instruments, panels with glowing symbols, rods that hummed softly, objects too smooth, too seamless to be of human design. The air carried a faint vibration, as if alive with unseen energy. He pressed his hand against the wall, expecting cold metal. Instead, it felt warm, almost alive. The beings followed him, but not quickly. Their steps were measured, their presence unshaken. Travis grabbed for anything that could be a weapon, his hands brushing against unfamiliar devices that offered no comfort. His heart thundered, his breath came in ragged bursts, and then a door, or something like one. The wall seemed to ripple, as though responding to his desperate touch. Suddenly, an opening appeared, fluid and seamless. Without thinking, he stumbled through. The corridor beyond was narrow, dimly lit. The walls curved, the air heavy. His footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the strange architecture. And there, ahead of him, something changed. The figures were gone. Instead, standing before him, was something else entirely. A man, or something like a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a smooth, seamless suit. His face was strikingly human, pale skin, symmetrical features, calm expression. Yet his eyes carried a depth that unsettled Travis more than the black orbs of the smaller beings. They were human and not human at once. The man did not speak. He simply gestured, his hand motioned gently, urging Travis forward. Travis, desperate, confused, clung to this as hope. A human face, a familiar form, perhaps, finally, safety. The man led him into another chamber. This one was vast. The air vibrated with a low hum. Panels of light stretched across walls, glowing softly in hues Travis had no words for. In the center of the room was a single chair, sleek, metallic, curved in ways that seemed to defy craftsmanship. The man guided him toward it. Travis resisted. Fear pulsed in every vein. His body shook, but the man's hand pressed gently against his shoulder, and suddenly, impossibly, the fear dissolved. Calm washed through him, unnatural, invasive yet soothing. His body felt heavy, his mind light. His resistance melted like snow in sunlight. He sank into the chair. Around him, the walls shimmered. Patterns of light danced before his eyes. Shapes shifted, like stars rearranging themselves across the sky. His mind blurred, his thoughts slowed. He felt both weightless and pinned, both free and captured. The man's face hovered above him, unreadable. His lips never moved, yet Travis felt as though thoughts were passing between them. Not words, not language, but impressions. Calm, silence, stillness, and then nothing. The next fragment of memory was of waking by the roadside, the night air cold against his skin, the hum of a distant highway in his ears. The craft was gone. The forest was dark. He stumbled toward a light, found himself at a gas station, and called his family. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. That was his story. Fragmented, unbelievable, yet told with the trembling conviction of a man who had lived it. Skeptics scoffed. They said he had hallucinated, dreamed, fabricated. But those who sat with Travis, who looked into his eyes as he recounted the memory, often came away unsettled, because it did not sound like a fantasy. It sounded like a nightmare, too real to be invented. And as Travis repeated it, again and again, the weight of those fragments became a story that could not be erased. A craft in the forest, a beam of light, small beings with dark eyes, human-like figures with strange calm, a chair of impossible design, and then silence, always silence. the kind of silence that changes you forever. When Travis Walton returned from the forest, the mystery did not end with his story. It multiplied. The words he spoke rippled far beyond Snowflake, Arizona. They reached newspapers, television screens, investigators, skeptics, and believers around the world. Some listened with wonder, others with laughter, but no one could ignore him. For years, people had whispered about strange lights, about unexplained encounters, about beings that defied explanation. But Travis was different. He was young. He was ordinary. He had 6 coworkers who stood beside him, swearing that they too had seen the impossible. And he had vanished, not for an hour, not for a night, but for 5 long days. The public leaned forward. And then the storm began. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself imagine that era, the 70s, when the world was both smaller and larger, when rumors spread quickly, but mysteries seemed endless. Reporters crowded outside his home. Cameras followed him, their lenses hungry for either a crack in his voice or a confirmation of his truth. Journalists demanded details. Some asked gently, others pressed with the sharp edge of disbelief. Travis, still pale, still shaken, spoke softly. His words came slowly, like a man who had lived a nightmare and could not wake from it. He described the craft. He described the beings. He described the silence that pressed against him inside those walls. Believers leaned closer, hearing in his voice the resonance of authenticity. They said, "This is it. This is proof. This is the testimony we've waited for." But skeptics sharpened their doubts. They called it a hoax. They said the loggers had concocted the story for money or fame. They accused Travis of hiding in the woods for 5 days, feeding on scraps, waiting for the perfect dramatic return. They dissected every sentence, every pause, every inconsistency. Yet there were things they could not explain. The polygraph tests, the panic of the crew, the genuine fear etched on 6 men's faces as they told the same impossible tale. The physical condition of Travis when he returned, weak, dehydrated, thinner, but without the signs of surviving rough wilderness. Doctors shook their heads, reporters argued, investigators split down the middle. And in the tension between belief and denial, the story grew larger. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Travis Walton's name became a symbol. To some, he was a liar. To others, he was a witness to the extraordinary. To all, he was unforgettable. The small town of Snowflake struggled beneath the weight of attention. Families who had once whispered the story of that night now spoke it openly, with pride or with shame, depending on their belief. Children at school repeated rumors. Adults in grocery stores argued in hushed tones. The town fractured between those who defended Travis and those who mocked him. But Travis himself carried the heaviest weight, because he did not want fame. He did not want ridicule. He only wanted to forget what had happened. But forgetting was impossible. Every interview reopened the wound. Every flashbulb made him flinch. Every skeptic's laugh cut deep. And yet, he kept telling his story, not for glory, not for gain, but because he could not bury the truth. For him, the silence of the craft was louder than any denial. The dark eyes of the beings lingered longer than any jeer. The memory of waking inside that chamber was etched into him deeper than any doubt could erase. The world was listening, and the world was divided. But whether believed or not, Travis Walton had already changed the conversation. The Phoenix Lights would come later. Rendlesham Forest would come later. But in the mid-1970s, the Walton case became one of the clearest, most compelling abduction stories of its time. And it endures, not because it was solved, but because it wasn't. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Some mysteries survive not because they are explained, but because they resist explanation. And Travis Walton's story is one of those mysteries. A story carried by silence. A story carried by memory. A story carried by a man who vanished into the woods and returned with eyes that had seen something he could never unsee. The lights of the cameras eventually dimmed. Reporters returned to their cities. Headlines shifted to other stories, and the immediate frenzy surrounding Travis Walton began to settle. But for Travis, life never returned to what it had been. Because when you carry a mystery like this, you do not simply go back. You live with it. You wake with it. You breathe with it. For Travis, the weight of the experience was not only in memory, but in the way the world treated him afterward. Some believed him. They shook his hand, told him he was brave, told him he had given voice to what they themselves had always suspected, that we are not alone. But others mocked him. They called him a liar, a fraud, a seeker of attention. They laughed at him in grocery stores. They whispered behind his back. Children in town repeated what their parents said, sometimes cruel, sometimes dismissive. The ridicule cut as deeply as the memory of the craft itself. Breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale. Imagine yourself in his shoes, walking down the same small-town streets you had known your whole life. But now every face you pass carries a question, or a doubt, or a smirk. Travis carried it with quiet endurance. He tried to return to work, but logging crews did not want the attention. He tried to move on, but interviews followed him. Conferences asked for him. The story refused to let him live in silence. And yet, silence was all he craved. At night, he woke with flashes of memory, the curved walls, the dark eyes, the suffocating calm of the chamber. His body trembled, his breath came short. He would stare into the dark, wondering if the silence of the forest would one day return for him. His family suffered too. His mother, strong but weary, shielded him from questions she could not answer. His siblings defended him, but their own lives became marked by the shadow of his name. And yet, through all of it, Travis did not waver. He could have confessed to a hoax. He could have said it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding, a lie told in fear. That confession would have brought him relief, perhaps even forgiveness from skeptics. But he never did, because it was not a lie. And so he carried it. Over the years, the story followed him like a second shadow. Conferences invited him to speak. Researchers pressed him for details. He sat under bright lights, his voice calm, his story steady, always the same. The forest, the craft, the beam, the beings, the silence. He wrote about it, he retold it, and each time he relived it. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Imagine the exhaustion of carrying a memory that cannot be set down, of being asked again and again to hold it up before others, to prove it, to defend it, to live inside it. For Travis, the story became both wound and legacy. A wound, because it scarred him with ridicule, with suspicion, with nights he could not sleep. A legacy, because it tied his name forever to one of the most famous abduction cases in history. He had not asked for it, but he could not escape it, and so he lived in the in-between, between belief and doubt, between memory and mystery, between being an ordinary man and being something more. And perhaps that is what made his story endure. Because in Travis Walton, people saw not only the extraordinary, but the ordinary man who carried it. He was not a scientist, not a politician, not a figure of authority. He was a logger, young and unassuming, thrust into something he could neither control nor forget. And that, more than anything, made his story feel real. Breathe deeply now. Inhale. Exhale. Let the thoughts settle. Sometimes the truth is not delivered by those in power, but by those caught in its path. Travis Walton was caught, and he never escaped. Stories do not stay in the towns where they are born. They travel, they echo, they transform, and sometimes they take on lives of their own. The story of Travis Walton did just that. What began in the stillness of an Arizona forest soon spread to living rooms across America, and then across the world. At first, it traveled through whispers, through grainy newspaper articles, through skeptical headlines tucked into the back pages. But as years passed, it became something larger, a cultural phenomenon. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself feel that shift. A private terror becoming a public legend. Writers came first, UFO researchers who collected accounts like constellations in the sky. They traveled to Snowflake, interviewed Travis and his coworkers, sifted through police reports, studied polygraph results. For them, the Walton case was gold, a rare event with multiple witnesses, physical consequences, and a man who had vanished for 5 days. They wrote books, essays, and reports, and with each retelling, the mystery gained new weight. Then came documentaries. Television crews set up cameras in small-town kitchens, in forest clearings, in police offices. They replayed Travis's halting words, the steady voices of his coworkers, the suspicious questions of investigators. Audiences watched with wide eyes, some shaking their heads, others nodding in quiet belief. The Walton case became one of the most famous abduction stories of all time. And then came Hollywood. In 1993, nearly 20 years after the abduction, a film appeared, Fire in the Sky. Loosely based on Travis's story, it dramatized the night in the forest, the frantic search, the suspicions of murder, and most of all, the abduction itself. The film's depiction of Travis aboard the craft was unforgettable, terrifying, visceral, filled with grotesque detail. For many, those images became their first encounter with the Walton case. But Travis himself admitted it wasn't accurate. The movie amplified the horror, stretching his fragmented memories into a nightmare more suited for cinema than reality. The real experience, though terrifying, had been quieter, stranger, more dreamlike, less about violence, more about silence. Yet the film ensured his story would never fade. Millions watched, millions whispered, millions wondered, and suddenly, the name Travis Walton was known far beyond Snowflake, Arizona. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Imagine how that must have felt, to see your private terror retold on screens across the world, transformed into entertainment, debated in magazines, dissected on late-night talk shows. For Travis, it was a double edge. The film brought attention. It spread his story wider than ever before, but it also painted him into a role he did not fully recognize, a victim of horror, rather than a witness to mystery. Yet he carried it as he always had, calmly, steadily, without retreat, because the story was no longer his alone. It belonged to culture. The Walton case became a cornerstone of UFO lore. Conferences revisited it year after year. Researchers debated it, skeptics attacked it, believers defended it. And still, Travis remained the same, quiet, steady, unwavering. His story never changed. The forest, the craft, the beam of light, the small beings, the human-like figures, the silence, always the silence. Close your eyes, inhale deeply, exhale slowly. Let yourself feel how a single night can ripple outward, transforming into books, into films, into endless conversations across decades. Travis Walton never asked for it, but he became part of history, not official history written in textbooks, but living history, carried in whispers, in late-night talks, in the collective imagination of all who wonder about what lies beyond. And that may be the greatest truth of all, because sometimes a story does not need to be proven to survive. It only needs to be remembered. And the story of Travis Walton is remembered still. The years moved on, but the mystery of Travis Walton did not fade. If anything, it deepened. For some, his story was proof, undeniable, unforgettable proof that humanity was not alone. For others, it was a hoax that had grown too large to dismantle. A lie carried forward on the strength of repetition. Let yourself feel the tension that never lifted from this story. The push and pull of disbelief and conviction, of doubt and wonder. Skeptics published their theories. They said Travis had hidden in a cabin during those 5 days, fed secretly by friends or family, waiting for the perfect moment to reappear. To gaps in memory, the Walton case endured, not because it was solved, but because it was unsolvable. Every debate breathed new life into it. Every skeptic's dismissal was answered with another believer's defense. Every attempt to erase it only deepened the imprint it left. Even decades later, UFO researchers returned to Snowflake, seeking new angles, new details, new clarity. They interviewed Travis again and again. They tracked down the loggers, now older, still steady in their words. They asked the same questions, received the same answers. A craft, a beam, a man gone. The memory had not changed. Breathe again. Inhale. These were the voices of men, still carrying a night that would not release them. The Walton case became more than a UFO story. It became a mirror reflecting our hunger for answers, our fear of ridicule, and Travis himself stood in the middle, steady, unchanged. He never offered more than what he remembered. He never embellished. He never surrendered. He simply said, "This is what I saw. This is what happened to me. Believe it or don't. But I know my truth." Close your eyes. Interview after interview. Skeptic after skeptic. His story never bent. His memory never faded. His silence never cracked into confession. That is why his story still lives. Not because it was proven, not because it was solved, but because it refused to die. Not every story survives because it is proven. Some survive because they speak to something deeper, something unspoken within us. The Travis Walton case is one of those stories. For decades, it has lingered not only in UFO books or on late-night radio, but in the imagination of ordinary people. Parents tell it to children on porches. Friends whisper it around campfires. Listeners drift into sleep as the tale unfolds in gentle voices. Why? Because it is more than a mystery. It is a mirror. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself step into that mirror now. On one side, there is fear. The forest at night, the glow of an impossible craft, the beam of light striking a young man, lifting him into silence, the thought that you could be taken at any moment, lifted into a world you cannot control. This fear is primal, lodged deep within us, the fear of the unknown, the fear of losing yourself to something larger than you. But on the other side of the mirror, there is wonder. Because what Travis described was not only terror, it was awe. The small beings with dark eyes, calm, deliberate, not cruel. The taller figures, human-like, almost protective, guiding him without words. The strange chair, the shimmering lights, the silence that seemed less like emptiness and more like presence. For some, the story is about aliens. For others, it is about something deeper. The possibility that we are not alone, that there is intelligence beyond our world, and that perhaps it is not here to harm, but to remind us of how much mystery remains. And that reminder is powerful, because human beings live between two hungers, the hunger for certainty and the hunger for wonder. The Walton case denies us certainty. There is no proof that satisfies skeptics. There are no photographs that silence debate. There is only memory, only testimony, only fragments. But the Walton case feeds our hunger for wonder. It gives us the image of a glowing craft in the Arizona forest. It gives us the story of a man lifted by light, returned after days with eyes that had seen something beyond. It gives us the feeling that the universe is larger, stranger, more alive than we allow ourselves to admit. Close your eyes deeper. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself rest inside that wonder. Because this is why the story lives on. Not in police files, not in scientific journals, but in hearts, in whispers, in dreams. For some, it is a cautionary tale, a warning of powers beyond our control. For others, it is a comfort, proof that there is more than the ordinary, more than the routine, more than the small circle of our daily lives. And for many, it is simply a bedtime story, not a children's tale of fantasy, but a human story of mystery, a story told softly, calmly, to ease the restless mind into the realm of dreams. Because dreams, like UFOs, are places where certainty dissolves and possibility opens. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Perhaps that is the true meaning of the Travis Walton case. Not to prove, not to solve, but to remind. Remind us that mystery is alive. Remind us that wonder survives ridicule. Remind us that silence can speak louder than answers. And in that reminder, there is peace. Because life is not only about knowing. Life is also about imagining, about wondering, about allowing ourselves to be small beneath a vast and living sky. The Travis Walton story gives us that gift. A gift wrapped not in evidence, but in awe. A gift carried not in answers, but in silence. A gift that lulls us, even tonight, into sleep. So rest now. Inhale. Exhale. Let the forest fade into your imagination. Let the glow of the craft soften into starlight. Let the silence of mystery hold you like a blanket. And remember, some stories endure not because they are solved, but because they are unforgettable. The story of Travis Walton has always been larger than the man himself. Yet behind the headlines, the debates, the films, and the whispers, there is still a man. A man who was only 22 when the light took him. A man who was only trying to make a living in the forests of Arizona. A man who never asked to become a symbol. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Let yourself see him, not as a name in a mystery, but as a person. Because after the forest, Travis had to live a life. He married. He raised children. He worked, he aged, but all of it was filtered through the story of one night. For no matter what he did, no matter where he went, people saw the light in the forest before they saw the man standing in front of them. For some, he was a hero, the one who had lived through what others only dreamed about. For others, he was a fraud, the man who had fooled the world with a tale of abduction. But for himself, he was simply Travis, a man who carried a memory too heavy to set down. The burden never left. Because when you become the center of a mystery, you cannot control how the world remembers you. You can only repeat your truth, steady and unwavering, and let the years decide what survives. And Travis did repeat it. For decades, in interviews, in books, in conferences, his story never changed. The details remained the same. The forest, the craft, the beam of light, the strange beings, the human-like figures. The silence that wrapped itself around him like a second skin. He could have stopped. He could have withdrawn completely, allowed the story to drift into rumor. But he didn't. He kept speaking. Perhaps because silence would have been heavier. Perhaps because once you've seen mystery face to face, keeping it inside feels impossible. And so his life became not only his own, but a living bridge to the unknown. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Imagine the weight of that legacy. To know that the world may never believe you, yet to still speak, softly, steadily, year after year. The decades passed. The forest remained. The night of November 5th, 1975, became history. And Travis Walton grew older. But the light never left him. It lingered in his voice, in his eyes, in the way he carried himself. It lingered in the way his name echoed in conferences, in documentaries, in late-night discussions among those who still look up at the sky and wonder. For the truth is this: Travis Walton's story is not only about aliens. It is about endurance. The endurance of a man against ridicule. The endurance of memory against silence. The endurance of wonder against doubt. And perhaps that is why the story survives. Because beneath the details, the craft, the beings, the 5 missing days, there is simply a man who stood in a clearing, faced the impossible, and was never the same again. Close your eyes deeper. Inhale. Exhale. The world may debate him forever. Skeptics may write him off. Believers may hail him as proof. But in the end, the story belongs to Travis, and he has never let it go. The forest has not changed. The same pines still rise against the Arizona sky. The same dirt roads wind through shadows. The same silence falls heavy when the sun dips behind the ridges. Nature does not forget, but it does not explain. It simply endures. And somewhere within that forest, in memory if not in presence, the light still hovers. It lingers in the imagination of those who saw it. It lingers in the whispers of those who heard the story. It lingers in the silence that comes whenever we look upward, wondering what might be above us. For Travis Walton, that silence never left. It became part of his life, a companion, a shadow, a reminder. He carried it through decades, through ridicule and praise, through nights of restless memory, and mornings of steady retelling. And so the story became larger than a single man. It became a thread in the great tapestry of mystery. A story told around campfires, a tale whispered in darkened rooms, a bedtime story for those who find comfort not in answers, but in questions. Breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Because that is what the Travis Walton case has become. A question wrapped in silence. What happened in the forest that night? What was the craft that hovered between the trees? Who were the beings with dark eyes, the figures with pale faces, the presences that moved with such calm precision? No one can say, not with certainty, not with proof. And yet the story lives, because truth is not always measured in evidence. Sometimes it is measured in endurance, in the weight of memory, in the sound of a voice that has never wavered, even under decades of doubt. Travis Walton endured, and his story endures with him. Close your eyes. Imagine again that night in 1975. The forest stretching endlessly, the truck rattling down the road, 7 men laughing, talking, unaware of what was waiting. Imagine the sudden glow between the trees, the impossible light, the figure of Travis stepping forward while the others shouted for him to stop. See the beam. See his body lifted, struck, thrown. Feel the panic of his friends as they fled, the guilt as they returned, the silence when they found him gone. And then imagine the silence of where he awoke. The curved walls, the dark eyes, the strange calm of beings who seemed more curious than cruel. The human-like figure who led him to the chair. The lights, the silence, always the silence. It is that silence that lingers now, decades later. Not frightening, but steady. Not violent, but vast. A silence that speaks without words, reminding us of how small we are, how much we do not know, how much wonder remains in the universe. And perhaps that is the true meaning of the Travis Walton story. Not terror, not proof, not even explanation, but wonder. Wonder that life is larger than we think. Wonder that mystery still breathes among us. Wonder that silence itself can change us forever. Breathe again. Inhale. Exhale. Let that wonder settle deep in your chest, soothing, steady, gentle. For tonight, the forest is quiet. The stars glitter above. The story has been told, and now it rests with you. Carry it softly into your dreams. The forest remembers. The light remembers. And now, you remember too. Good night.